On the biggest night in K-pop history, a 360-degree stage, pyrotechnics, thousands of LEDs, Jimin chose to show up as simple as possible. All white, no excessive ornaments, no striking colors, and that is exactly what made the entire world unable to stop talking about him. White sleeveless top, white cargo pants, a double belt wrapped around his waist, shoulder-length blonde hair soaked through from the heavy rain that fell all night long. In the middle of a stage that was literally on fire, Jimin stood in the quietest, cleanest, most honest shade of white. And if you, like millions of other armies, immediately thought that was just a regular fashion choice, you were completely wrong. Because not a single detail in a BTS performance has ever happened by accident. And Jimin's white outfit that night carries layers of meaning that most people never even noticed. Let's start with the most fundamental layer. The color white holds an extraordinarily special place in Korean culture. This is not just a bright color or something that looks good under stage lighting. In Korean tradition, white is the color of purity, sincerity, and a clean soul. For thousands of years, the Korean people have been known as Baekgiminjok, the white-clad people. This is a cultural identity rooted incredibly deep, a symbol that something sacred and pure is standing before you. When Jimin chose white on the opening night of the most anticipated tour in modern K-pop history, he was not just choosing a color. He was sending a direct message to every single army in that stadium and watching from around the world that this night was sacred. That BTS returning to the stage after nearly 4 years was something clean, pure, and beginning from a place of complete honesty. But we need to step back for a moment to understand why that context matters so much. BTS was off the stage for almost 4 years. Not because they did not want to perform, not because they had lost their passion. They were completing mandatory military service, an obligation every Korean man must fulfill. And during that time, 7 people who had already become the biggest names in global music had to return to being ordinary soldiers who woke up early, went through drills, and lived a life very far from the spotlight. Those were not 4 years of silence. They were 4 years of transformation. And when they finally came back, the album they brought was named Arirang, taken from a traditional Korean folk song that has existed for centuries, often called Korea's unofficial national anthem. This album is not just a collection of songs. It is a declaration of identity. It is the answer from 7 men who spent 4 years quietly asking themselves who they really are. And Jimin, given the archetype of the poet within the Arirang concept, showed up in white. If you read designer Jae Songseo's interview with WWD, you will find something incredibly revealing. Songzeo is the Korean designer who created the lyrical armor collection for BTS, costumes inspired by early Joseon-era armor and traditional Korean dress, reinterpreted through an avant-garde modern lens. And when he spoke specifically about Jimin, he said, "Jimin is a poet, someone soft, full of feeling, with tremendous power in his performance." White is the color of a poet. White is the color of someone who arrives not with weapons or physical force, but with words, with emotion, with a beauty that can cut straight through to the heart of anyone watching. And when you look at that photo of Jimin on stage, the simple white sleeveless top, the white cargo pants with the double belt giving structure without excess, you are looking at lyrical armor in its most honest form. Armor made not from iron, but from sincerity. Now let's talk about the detail ARMY has been discussing the most, that double belt. In fashion, a belt is about definition. A belt tells the world, this is my center of gravity. This is the point where everything organizes itself. One belt is enough to give structure. But Jimin wore 2. And that was not a stylist mistake, not a last-minute decision. Every single detail of the Arirang looks have been thought through and revised multiple times, down to the smallest element. The double belt speaks to duality. Jimin has always been the hardest member of BTS to put in a box. He is a dancer with precision that borders on inhuman, but also a vocalist who can make an entire room cry with nothing more than the way he places a breath between 2 words. He performs with an energy that can move 40,000 people at once, and yet he is also the member most often seen crying at concerts, the one most openly vulnerable. Those 2 belts are the 2 sides of Jimin. Strength and softness, precision and poetry, warrior and poet, and all of it wrapped in white. Think about what it actually takes to pull that off. To stand on a stage that size, A 360-degree setup that means there is no back row, no hidden angle, no corner where you are not being watched. And choose an outfit that offers you absolutely nowhere to hide. No distracting pattern. No dramatic color to draw the eye away from you. Just white. Just you. Just whatever you are carrying inside, fully exposed under the lights. Most performers would never risk it. Most performers use their costume as armor in a very different sense, as protection, as distraction, as a layer between themselves and the audience. The louder the outfit, the easier it is to hide behind it. But Jimin went the other direction entirely. He stripped everything back. And in doing so, he made a choice that very few artists at his level would have the confidence to make. There is something else worth paying attention to here, and it connects directly to what ARMY has been saying for years about Jimin as a performer. When you watch him on stage, there is always the sense that he is not performing for the cameras. He is not performing for the press photos. He is not thinking about how he looks from the best angle. He is performing for the person in the very last row who saved up for months to be there. He is performing for the person watching the live stream at 3 in the morning from the other side of the world who could not afford a ticket but needed to be part of this moment anyway. White communicates that. White says, "I am not here to impress you. I am here to be honest with you." And that honesty is something Jimin has been building toward for a long time. Think about his solo discography. Face. Not face the album title, face the act itself. Looking directly at the parts of yourself you usually avoid. His solo work has always been about excavating something real, something uncomfortable, something that most artists package more carefully before presenting it to the world. Jimin does not package it. He hands it to you as it is. The white outfit at Goyang is the visual extension of that same philosophy. Here I am, exactly as I am. No packaging, no extra layer between us. And there is one more dimension to this that I do not think gets enough attention. Jimin has spoken before, in interviews, in Weber's posts, in the small moments fans catch between performances, about the pressure of returning. About what it feels like to step back onto a stage after an absence this long, knowing that millions of people have been carrying your music with them through some of the hardest years of their lives. That is not a small thing to walk back into. White, in that context, is also humility. It is the color of someone who is not arriving to reclaim a throne. It is the color of someone who is arriving to say thank you. To say, I know what this means to you. I know what you carried while I was gone. And I am here now, as clean and open and present as I can possibly be. That is what the white outfit said, before he sang a single note, before the pyrotechnics, before the rain, before any of the 23 songs in that set list. The outfit already said everything. There was one moment from that night that went viral and perfectly captures the essence of Jimin's entire performance. In the middle of rain that never stopped from the very beginning of a show, rain that made Suga describe the stage as a water park, rain that made Jimin himself admit he was soaked completely through, Jimin kept moving, kept singing, kept radiating something that no weather could ever stop. A soaking wet, white outfit should have been a visual disaster. White when wet loses its shape. White when wet looks heavy, clingy, uncomfortable. But that night, being wet added an entirely new dimension. Jimin's drenched white outfit under the stage lights created a visual effect that was almost poetic, like someone who had walked through a storm and was still standing, still moving, still beautiful. And that is exactly the message being sent. For 4 years, BTS was drenched in silence, in absence, in questions nobody could answer, including themselves. Would they come back? Were they still relevant? Was the world still waiting? And their answer was to stand on that stage in a pouring rainstorm, in a soaked white outfit, with 40,000 people screaming their names, and over 4 million more watching via live stream from every corner of the world. White was not just a color that night. White was a statement. Now we need to talk about something bigger, why this color choice matters so deeply in the context of Jimin's career as a whole. Jimin is one of only 2 BTS members to ever hold the #1 position on the Hot 100, the Global 200, and the Global Excl US charts, but with different songs. Like Crazy took him to the top of the Hot 100 in April 2023, who ruled both global charts for 2 full weeks in August 2024. These are achievements very few Korean artists can claim. And throughout that solo period, Jimin built a visual and artistic identity that grew increasingly mature, increasingly bold, increasingly personal. But something was different when he returned with BTS in the Arirang era. During his solo years, Jimin often played with dark and light, with dramatic colors and bold silhouettes. But in Arirang, he came back to white. And that is not a step backward. It is a deeply intentional choice from someone who already knows exactly how powerful he is, who no longer needs to prove anything through something flashy, who can stand on the biggest stage in K-pop history in the simplest possible outfit and still be the visual center of gravity for the entire night. That is a different level of confidence, entirely. That is someone who knows his power does not live in the costume. The costume is just the frame. The power lives inside. And honestly, that evolution is worth sitting with for a second. Because if you go back and look at Jimin's visual journey across his solo work, the dark, almost theatrical energy of his early solo stages, the way he used fashion to build a wall between himself and the world while simultaneously pulling people in, you start to understand what returning to white actually means for someone with his history. It means he no longer needs the wall. There is a version of Jimin from a few years ago who used complexity as a form of protection. Layered looks, heavy textures, colors that said, "Look at the art, not at me." And that version was valid. That version was doing exactly what he needed to do at that point in his life and career, building something, testing something, figuring out the boundaries of who he was as a solo artist separate from the group. But Arirang Jimin is not that version. Arirang Jimin is someone who has already done the work, already faced the questions, already sat in the silence of those 4 years and arrived at something that feels settled. Not finished. Artists like Jimin are never finished, but settled. Grounded. Sure of the foundation, even if the building is still going up. White is what that looks like from the outside. It is also worth noting how rare this actually is at this level of fame. When you are performing for 40,000 people with 4 million more watching online, the instinct, for almost everyone, is to go bigger. More. Louder. Give them something so visually overwhelming that they cannot look away. That is the safe choice. That is the choice that protects you from the risk of being called simple, or understated, or forgettable. Jimin made the opposite choice. And instead of disappearing into the simplicity, he became the only thing anyone could look at. That is not luck. That is not even just natural charisma, although Jimin has that in a way that is genuinely difficult to explain. That is the result of someone who has spent years understanding exactly what he carries on stage and learning how to put it down in front of people without flinching. The white outfit was not a risk. For anyone else, maybe. For Jimin, at this point in his career, wearing white on that stage was the most accurate thing he could have done. There is one more thing we need to talk about, and this might be the part that gets discussed the least, but it matters the most. The Arirang album has a song called Into the Sun, co-written by Jimin and Tyler Johnson, a collaborator whose name is well known to fans of global music. That song is about moving toward the light, about choosing not to hide even when everything feels heavy. And when Jimin performed in white on that stage, white that reflects light, white that hides nothing, white that cannot lie, he was living those lyrics out literally. White is the color of light itself, not a color that absorbs light, not a color that hides in shadows. White is the color that refuses to be unseen. And on the opening night of the most long-awaited tour in K-pop history, standing before 40,000 people who had been waiting for almost 4 years, Jimin chose not to hide. He chose white. He chose to be seen. He chose to stand in the middle of all of it, soaked by the rain, still moving, still singing, still being the poet whose armor is made entirely from sincerity. And if anyone still wonders why such a simple outfit could generate this many conversations, this many viral photos, this many threads on Twitter and TikTok, the answer is simple. Because when something is made with genuine depth, people feel it, even before they understand why. ARMY felt that something was different that night. Something in the way Jimin stood, in the way the light bounced off his soaked white outfit, in the way he moved his hand to his chest with an expression that words struggle to describe. ARMY felt it before they had time to analyze it. And that is exactly the power Jimin has always carried as a performer, the ability to communicate something that goes beyond words, beyond songs, beyond choreography. Jimin on stage is the communication itself. And the color white he chose for that night is one more layer of that communication. A message sent not just to the 40,000 people inside Going Stadium, not just to the millions watching through a live stream, but to the full length of his journey, to the version of himself who 4 years earlier stood at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas during BTS's last performance before the hiatus and quietly asked, "Will we ever be able to come back to something like this?" The answer was yes. And the answer was white. Before this video ends, I want to ask you something. Out of everything we talked about today, the philosophy of white in Korean culture, the poet archetype in the lyrical armor collection, the double belt representing Jimin's duality, the rain-soaked moment that became one of the most iconic visuals of the entire tour, which detail surprised you the most? The one you never expected before watching this? Leave it in the comments. I always read them, and I am always curious how different people see the same thing from completely different angles. If you enjoyed this video and want to keep following content about BTS and the era, because there is still so much more to cover, from Tokyo to North America, from the album tracks to the onstage moments you will never find in mainstream media, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, because the next video is already on its way, and you do not want to miss it. See you in the next one.